Now we've got the U.S. Senator from Hawaii, Brian Schatz. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
So, after a lot of uncertainty, I think, initial uncertainty about Donald Trump's nominees, it does seem like the Republican caucus more broadly has more of a sense of falling in line right now. So I'm curious, from your vantage in the Senate, does it seem like the Republicans no longer have an appetite to be pushing back against Trump in the way that it seemed to, at least in the immediate aftermath of Matt Gaetz's nomination, not looking like it was going to succeed? But now we still have people like RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. So what is the sense among your Republican colleagues in terms of whether they're willing to push back against Trump's more extreme nominees?
I think they would like to prevent some of the more extreme nominees from being confirmed. And I think they're trying to figure out, sort of what the market will bear in their own, MAGA world, right? I think they have made the judgment that they can vote against one, maybe two of Trump's nominees. But if it starts to get to three or four or five, then you're doing real, political damage both to Trump and arguably, the next time you have to survive a primary in a red state. So I think they're being somewhat clever about this. Obviously, Gaetz is gone and the DEA guy is gone. And the others are, not even actually submitted formally to the Senate. So I think the Democrats' position right now ought to be not to comment on most of these nominees until they are formally submitted to the Senate, because the focus has to be on, do the Republicans even have unanimity on their own nominees?
How are you thinking about this in terms of where Democrats should expend their political capital? Because obviously we're in the minority everywhere, and Democrats also have a tendency to make everything into a five-alarm fire, which in turn kind of makes nothing feel like a five-alarm fire. Very much, not Boy Who Cried Wolf, because a lot of these things are serious and deserving of attention, but it has the result of feeling like nothing is as extreme as it should feel. So how do you kind of move into this process? Or how does the party more broadly move into this process, knowing that you only have limited political capital to spend?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right way to look at it, which is that we do have to pick our spots. But, I think some of these, some of the things that Trump is going to do, our events are going to overtake us. And it's unlikely that we're going to be as, capable of showing judiciousness once Trump is fully underway and doing executive orders and nominating crazy people. It's going to be on. But I do agree that even for the public on the left, there was a sense that if everything is an emergency, then maybe nothing is an emergency. So we have to pick the ones that I think resonate with people. And to your point, look, there's a lot of work that I do in the United States Senate that is absolutely essential for Hawaii, for America, for democracy. And yet I may not emphasize it in my communications because it's kind of like infrastructure work for democracy itself. And generally speaking, most people are like, okay, I'm glad you're taking care of that, but that's not my main thing. And so when I think about what to fight about and whom to fight about, we have to fight for people on behalf of people and not for institutions and on behalf of institutions. There's a general sense that Democrats want to fight for institutions because they are already in charge of those institutions. So then it becomes more about protecting your prerogatives to be at the at the helm of something, as opposed to, hey, look, people are going to get hurt here.
Well, I'm curious how that informs your messaging moving forward, because I do think, and I absolutely include myself in this, that Democrats were broadly focused on protecting norms, institutions, democracy heading into 2024. And I think what a lot of us didn't consider, myself of course included in this, is that for a lot of people, those very institutions aren't working for them. I mean, a lot of people are very unhappy in this country. They're unhappy with the housing situation, with their financial situation, their own economic situation. And so when they see Democrats fighting for institutions that they believe largely abandon them somewhere along the line, that actually exacerbates the distance between the Democratic Party and the people that we're trying to reach. So how are you looking toward fixing, insofar as you can, the messaging moving forward, as we obviously try to claw back some semblance of a majority moving forward to 26 and 28?
I think what they're going to do on taxes gives us a real opportunity for strategic and political and moral clarity, because it really is going to be a smash and grab. It really is going to be taking a bunch of money from working people through tariffs and other taxes, and transferring it to a bunch of billionaires that are populating the cabinet. And I think that is something that can unite like sort of the leftist to the centrist in our coalition. And so I think that's one rallying point. But again, I just think we need to focus on what people are actually going through and describe the harm in those terms, not the harm to the Department of Defense, not the harm to the Constitution, not the harm to the norms of the United States Senate, but like how is somebody going to pay more or get screwed in some significant way? And there's going to be plenty of evidence for that, but it requires us. And, there's a thing that happened. I got to the Senate, 12, 13 years ago. And, there's a thing that happens when you get to the Congress, but particularly to the Senate, where I think even your communications shop thinks you're supposed to sound like an 1894 Whig, and just sort of like clearing your throat for the first 3 minutes and using a bunch of jargon. And so it's not just about what we focus on, but it's about what we don't do anymore. And it should not take us a couple of minutes to clear our throats. We should not find a provocative or complicated way to say something that is super simple. I'm watching this question of drones happen, and like Trump is saying what like regular people are saying, which is like, well, if they know, why don't they tell us? Right?
100%.
And so I just think we have to talk like normal humans. And it's a little bit challenging when you got a bunch of people who have like achieved a pretty important job, not talking like the rest of folks.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you said a lot in there that I want to jump in on, but the first was that this is going to be a cash and grab for a bunch of billionaires out there. But a lot of these billionaires we've seen have kind of fallen over themselves to align themselves with Trump. I mean, obviously, Elon Musk has turned Twitter into a right-wing megaphone. You have someone like Jeff Bezos, who, again, fell over himself to give $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. Mark Zuckerberg did the same. ABC News took what, this is just my opinion, what could have been a very winnable defamation case and turned it into a $15 million settlement that would go to Donald Trump's, foundation or something like that. But in any case, a lot of these billionaires that will benefit from Trump's presidency are also the very people that are going to be in charge of the media itself. And so how do you contend with that barrier when, yes, it's going to benefit billionaires, but those billionaires are the ones that are going to be largely responsible for delivering news to people and delivering that messaging to people, and they're obviously not going to do it in a way that kind of is insulting to their own interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to make sure not to. I mean, look, I saw what happened over the last couple of weeks, and it was very disappointing and alarming. So I don't want to diminish the importance of that. But on the other hand, bend but don't break, right? I mean, it's not as though the Washington Post's reporting, that there's any evidence that the Washington Post's reporting, for instance, or NBC's reporting is being manipulated by its billionaire owners. Now, we need to be vigilant about that. And I think the lesson that I have taken from all of this is like, billionaires are not going to save us. There's not like, a bunch of good billionaires are going to come in and fight the bad billionaires. Like, their interests do not align with regular people. And that's the problem, right? And so we have to be the party, to the extent that the Republicans have become a party that is against institutions. Now we have these incredibly powerful people who oversee international corporations who have cozied up to Donald Trump. And I think it's very important for that to be clarifying, right? During Black Lives Matter, during all the climate negotiations, during January 6th, all these corporations, because they're front-facing with consumers, sort of nominally were on the right side of history. But I think what we realized is something that, Secretary Pete said, I think, on a talk show, which is like, hey, rich people are going to do rich people things, right? And they can have a veneer of being like pro-climate or pro-choice or pro-innovation, but in the end, they want super low tax rates and they want very little in the way of regulation. And if they can get some subsidies and some contracts along the way, that's exactly what they're going to do. So we just have to have real clarity. They are not the ones that are going to save us.
I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of our language, right? We speak in a way that's safe, inoffensive, uncontroversial, and I think that's in large part owed to the fact that this is the Big Tent party. This is the party that focuses on people who are marginalized or largely left behind. and so that informs in large part how we speak to folks, because you don't want to say the same things that certain folks on the right can say, and they don't have to worry about blowback, because it's well, at least before this election, a largely homogenous group of people. So how do you kind of square those two things, where you want to have language that sounds human, that appeals to regular people, but at the same time, when you make sure that you appeal to so many people within such a broad tent, like such a large swath of people out there, you have to do it in a way that I think isn't going to offend anyone. So have you thought about that as like the Democratic Party's predicament more broadly?
Maybe. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure that it's like impossible to find a way to sound normal without offending someone. Like, we can sound normal. We can sound like a regular person and still not like offend part of our coalition. There's a way to be kind. There's a way to appreciate diversity without sounding like you just got, spit out of a faculty lounge and and you've like learned a bunch of, or you're 19 and you're learning a bunch of new language about the world and you're like road testing it. So I'm not sure I accept the premise that like it's some super high degree of difficulty thing to like talk normally. I just think if we started to talk normally, that would do like 80% of it. But there's another part of this, Brian, that you might be, I think, underestimating, which is it's also just pollsters, right? And this is, I want to be very clear. Pollsters didn't ask for this like apex position in Democratic strategy, but they now have it. I've seen this in the climate space. I've seen this in the civil rights space. They will test a particular proposition like 3 or 4 different ways. Like, here's the way to say it that polls the best, right? And often that is the way to say it that offends the least people, because you get somebody who maybe isn't actually sympathetic to your point of view, but if you say it in a certain way, it may be hidden enough that they go like, yeah, I'm fine with that. So the thing polls at 71-29 rather than 65-35, whatever the heck it is, right? And I think the problem with that is that, given that one of our most basic problems is that we don't penetrate into whole universes of people, because we're not saying things that are interesting. If you have a captive audience and you ask 100 people, 70 out of 100 are going to go like, yeah, that's the least offensive way to phrase that. But one of the I think, talents that Donald Trump has is to say things in maybe ways that are a little offensive, but they are interesting enough that they penetrate. Now, I don't think we should go out of our way to say things wacky, but I do think we need to calibrate this question of like, oh, this poll's at 65, not 62, to, okay, but does the 65 one sound like a person? Or do you sound like you're like AI spitting out a recommendation? And I think a lot of times we sound like we are actually trying to dodge angry people. And I think we just have to get a little more comfortable, just saying what we think. And I just remember when Trump tried to institute the Muslim ban, we had a bunch of pollsters come to us and say, hey, you might want to be careful about this, because it's actually polling, relatively strongly. And Booker and Murphy and a number of others and I basically told these people to fuck off. And we fought the Muslim ban. And you know what happened is the numbers moved, because people want to hear the argument. And they're lacking an argument. People are going to agree with whatever's sort of, not all of them, but people are going to agree with some whatever's presented to them. And I think that's one of the lessons here, is that it's important to get public opinion data, but our job is to move public opinion, not just to follow it.
Right. And I feel like for so long it feels like Washington like lags behind everybody else and are the last people to jump on board. Also, to your point, I think that eventually when you defer to the 65 to the 71 approval versus 65, and you chip away at the authenticity of your own message enough, eventually that filters down to make it more of a brand problem, because then you've done so many messages that were poll tested to be palatable for the most amount of people, and that becomes like the sense of what Democratic messaging is. It's always just a little bit more chipped away at. to sound a little bit more safe and unoffensive and uncontroversial to the broadest swath of people, and it starts to lose its humanity more broadly. And so, like, we clearly have a brand problem within the Democratic Party that I think could benefit from some sense of authenticity or relatability in the messaging itself.
And just plain speaking, right? Like, I don't want to like increase my degree of difficulty like so much that it's like, because there's a little bit of like, what do we mean by authenticity? I don't think people need to know your personal life story. I just think you need to sound like a person. That's all. And I just want to make a very kind of narrow point. It's not Latinx, right? Like the Latinx thing became this thing people fought over, right? And about. It's not Latinx. It's center the needs of. It's norms. It's institutions. It's even, Kamala's sort of closing message on the economy was like opportunity economy.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell that is. Like,
Right.
I'm sure it hit the right note, which was the left liked it because it sounds fair and good, but also entrepreneurs liked it because they like opportunity. And so we settled on it. But the problem is it doesn't sound like something a regular person would say. So I think the first question always is the thing we're saying something you could imagine someone you went to high school with actually saying out of their mouth, right? And again, like, I think the Kamala campaign did an extraordinary job under difficult circumstances, and she was an amazing candidate. But I remember just hearing that they're going to center the needs of the middle class, and I was like, I don't know anyone outside of politics who says center. Right? Yeah. Center is not a verb. It's a small thing, but it's not a small thing, because when you're trying to show people that you live the life that they live, or at least that you find it relatable, people know you live, people know where I work, right? And people know that there's like fancy sculptures and that I got to wear a suit. So they don't expect me to to be an auto mechanic. But they want me to be able to interact with an auto mechanic in a way where it's not like I'm all confused.
The test I use is whether or not my sister would understand, because my sister got her degree in exercise science. She deals with athletes, spends most of her time in the gym. And so if I'm really like trying to figure out even something so simple as, okay, does a normal person know what GOP means? And I'll ask her and she has no idea, then I'll know that when I'm talking about stuff so that I can better relate to regular people, don't use certain words. And I think that if I asked my sister what the care economy was, or whether she was, what it means to center the needs of someone, she probably wouldn't know. You know what I mean? So I think like kind of taking ourselves out of the like DC brain and putting ourselves in the shoes of people who don't listen to this stuff on a regular basis is going to be obviously much more helpful. And to that point, then, what's the deal with the rest of the Republican conference? Like, what do your colleagues think of this? Is there some sense that our messaging needs to change? Is there some sense that there has to be kind of like an overhaul? What's happening, I guess, behind the scenes within the Democratic Party?
I think look, I can't speak for the entire Democratic Party. I can speak for my Senate colleagues. We know it went poorly, and we know we need to make some fundamental shifts. I do think it's language and choice of words. I also think and I'm sure, Brian, you're thinking about this pretty deeply. We also have an ecosystem problem. They have a full on right-wing noise machine. And we just simply don't, to the extent that progressive philanthropy and big donors have invested in journalism. It has mostly been, straight down the middle journalism, which is very important, like ProPublica and all that stuff. And they provide an enormous public service. But there's nothing comparable to the kind of propaganda ecosystem that's been established on the right. And I think some people are thinking about how to fix that. I'm a little less interested in the kind of left-right calibration post-election, because it's just not obvious to me that we were either too far to the left or too far to the right. Look, we lost Florida by a lot, and reproductive choice, didn't hit the 60% threshold that it needed, but it still did very, very well. Same Arizona. So there are a lot of places that are voting for progressive policies and the things that we thought were going to be our ticket to electoral success, but just weren't. And so I just think we need to, here's the opportunity, right? To the extent that it was sort of an article of faith that communities of color were always going to go decisively for Democrats, right? And then that kind of got blown up in the last election cycle. to the extent that young people were considered a reliable Democratic constituency and that got blown up. It's certainly worthy of alarm. It's really worthy of alarm. But it also shows that a lot of these coalitions are maybe not as damn fixed as we think, right? And that most of the people in rural communities that didn't vote for Democrats never heard from Democrats, like not at all, did not hear from Democrats. And so we have to start communicating with folks. And the one thing I'll add too is that because we're earnest, because we want to solve problems, and all of those are the reasons that you should put us in charge of things in the government. But it's also a little bit of a hindrance when it comes to winning over folks, because let me tell you, it's culture, not policy, right? It's how we talk. It's how we come off. It's a vibe thing. And sure, if we had policy that were affirmatively offensive to rural people, that would not help. And I don't want to harm anyone anyway. But it's not like if we just pass a farm bill, right? Or, for instance, if we do a big pension fund bailout, then the Teamsters are going to end up voting for us. Like, one of the things that we have learned is even as we deliver in red communities, they keep slipping away from us. And so it's not like we can totally just policy our way out of this. We have to figure out what it is about us that is pissing them off. And some of that is this idea that politics is really downstream from culture, and that we have to meet people where they are, talk to, even the thing I just said, meet people where they are. Nobody knows what the fuck that means. We have to talk like regular people and relate to people in normal ways.
Yeah, I think that that's all so well put, and I think it's a big relief to me, and I'm certain a lot of people watching and listening right now, to hear you putting your finger very correctly on the mark of all of these things, and to know that you know we've got somebody like you in the Senate who understands this stuff to a degree that I think we're going to need to understand moving forward. So, with that said, thank you for taking the time today, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thanks, Brian. Take care.